From the earliest memories of my childhood to my grievances as a teen,
3D.
The Resident Evil franchise has been a source of joy, obsession, and fear that has stuck with me for over 20 years. This fervid routine has not only pertained to the video games, but the movie adaptations as well. The Resident Evil movies are ones of both praise and hatred from fans and critics alike. There are those who see them as enjoyable sci-fi horror movies that, thanks to their team and budget, are adaptations that are worth a watch. There are also those who see them as complete mockeries of the source material, saying that the films don't pay respect to the original storyline, characters, and places the spotlight on a Mary Sue main character that no one wanted. I've always stood by the opinion that the original Resident Evil movie trilogy are entertaining sci-fi horror films that possess actual dedication and quality. Just as well, I stand by them as worthy additions to the Resident Evil franchise overall, however, still in keeping with their own separate storyline and universe. The same cannot be said for the second Resident Evil film trilogy, which removed all traces of the elements and tone that made them the original successes that they were, in exchange for over-the-top action, pointless game references, and the overall lack of anything resembling survival horror. Which brings us to our discussion: how the first 3 Resident Evil movies serve as a worthwhile adaptation and tribute to the series, and how it eventually lost its focus as the sequels continued. The Resident Evil franchise began as a video game that coined the term survival horror. Rather than serve as a game that was just about shooting,
It's about reloading.
it was about survival, puzzle solving, ammo conservation, facing undead horrors in a claustrophobic and isolated environment, genetic engineering, and corporate malfeasance. A game that brought normal characters into a world of horror within a world of science fiction within a world of conspiracy exploration, all of which were executed with the same amount of creativity and atmosphere within the first Resident Evil movie through its production design, music, and story. One of the main reasons why the first film was received so negatively by fans was because the adaptation lacked characters, events, and locations from the original series. Naturally, one can't blame them for expecting as such from a movie called Resident Evil. This is because writer and director Paul W.S. Anderson, who had received praise for his film adaptation of Mortal Kombat, myself included, didn't want to simply make Resident Evil the movie.
So if you're watching a straight adaptation of Resident Evil 1, the game, there's no suspense. You know who's going to live, who's going to die, you know what the story is, and I felt that would make a very unsatisfying adaptation, because why not just go and play the game again?
And instead wanted to make a prequel film to the events of the first game. In the original game, Special Tactics and Rescue Squad officers find themselves trapped in a mansion in the forests of nearby Raccoon City, where they must survive the undead, bioweapons, and uncover the secrets of a deadly biological accident, all of which was conspired by the Umbrella Corporation, a powerful conglomerate pharmaceutical company that secretly engaged in genetic engineering. Anderson's vision was to focus the story on the viral outbreak itself and explore the depths of the underground laboratory beneath the mansion, with brand new characters, events, and settings that would allow fans and newcomers alike to experience a brand new Resident Evil story. Additionally, Anderson sought to incorporate his own influences and ideas into his film, primarily by connecting it to the fairy tale Alice in Wonderland. All of this combined crafted an entertaining experiment of an adaptation that we will now explore. The film starts with an unknown antagonist releasing the T-virus in the underground lab facility operated by the Umbrella Corporation. The Red Queen AI controlling the facility shuts down all operations and traps the employees inside, preventing a biohazardous outbreak. A few hours later, a military team is sent in to investigate the lockdown. Along the way, they encounter 2 security operatives for Umbrella who have lost their memory, Alice and Spence, as well as undercover environmentalist Matt. Together, they enter the underground laboratory, the Hive, unbeknownst to the horrors they will face, the hundreds of employees who have now become zombies, and the deadly bioweapons created by Umbrella. So what exactly is it about this story and these characters that make the adaptation work? Alice, an Umbrella operative suffering from amnesia, awakens in her bathroom completely unaware of who or where she is, and is immediately thrown into a horrifying wonderland of genetic experimentation and viral weaponry. a wonderland she falls asleep to enter and awakens when she leaves. And we, the audience, are discovering all these things just as she is. And our only goal, just like in the game, is survival and answers as to why this happened. Matt serves as the caterpillar, helping Alice on her journey while also wondering who exactly she is.
I was your sister's contact.
You betrayed her.
I don't know.
You caused
I
all
can't
of this.
remember.
Truth.
Don't remember the truth.
Explain yourself.
I'm afraid I can't explain myself, sir, because I'm not myself, you know.
Just as well, both characters evolve into another life form. Spence serves as the Cheshire Cat, both helping yet seemingly working against Alice, with no one really sure who he is or what his motivations are. Rain and JD serving as Tweedledee and Tweedledum, inseparable partners who are both no-nonsense but with attractive senses of humor. Kaplan serves as the White Rabbit, always nervous and always worried about time. The Licker serves as the Jabberwocky, a monstrous creation that Alice has to defeat. The Red Queen as the Queen of Hearts, an AI with homicidal tendencies that encourages beheading.
Kill her now!
Please.
Do it! Kill her!
Do it.
Kill her now! Kill her!
Umbrella as the Mad Hatter, a tyrannical conglomerate that controls everything and is essentially mad. Add to the mix the imagery of mirrors. White rabbits, an Alice in Wonderland paperweight, and the fact that Alice's red dress was originally going to be blue, completing Anderson's weaving of a children's fairy tale into a survival horror story. Even though none of these characters are from the games, they still serve as special forces sent in to investigate a biohazardous outbreak, complemented by operatives both working for and against the Umbrella Corporation, all of whom embody the dangers of desperately trying to survive the horror with limited resources. In addition to the characters, the execution of the production design, effects, and makeup takes the Wonderland concept and throws it into a world of genetic experimentation and biohazardous mystery. Once we move from the stillness and quiet of the mansion, we move to the labyrinthine underground lab, establishing the sense of claustrophobic dread the series is known for. This environment, which began as a lab with groundbreaking technology and a sanitized medical aesthetic, has become a futuristic, decaying prison. It's the feeling of soulless science mixed with hopeless abandonment. We enter this world of survival horror through a rabbit hole, a slow zoom in through a dark tunnel leading to a cold metallic display of someone in a biohazard suit handling an unknown substance in pristine vials, sleek, futuristic elegance immersed in an underlying evil. We see this through cold metallic walls, blue and white lighting, and pure white rooms. Juxtaposing this sanitary and technological environment is the true nature of all this research slowly bleeding through. The dark enclosed spaces of the utility tunnels, the maze of experiment boxes containing God knows what, the gradual degradation of the hallways. The same can be seen with the undead in the movie. These employees weren't normal civilians who were infected by being bitten. They were in the middle of ground zero as the infection spread through the ventilation system. Having already become infected, the Red Queen sought to prevent an outbreak by killing the employees through suffocation, drowning, falling, any means in hopes of containing the outbreak.
He wanted as much realism as he could possibly get, so we went into medical science. We avoided everything else like the plague.
Just as well, their faces and eyes have all become infectiously gruesome, both from infection and biohazardous materials. They're zombies that don't just look dead, they look sick.
If you die from suffocation, then you have a certain tinge of blue. If you die from drowning, you go a rather charming ochre color.
It's not so much the fear of becoming a zombie, it's the fear of becoming contaminated, and how your body is slowly succumbing to the virus. In the games, your character will become injured and slow down, with their health status being indicated by a heart monitor. However, there's no risk of becoming a zombie in the games, only succumbing to your wounds. In the movie, we see the T-virus symptoms illustrated through Rain, which I consider Michelle Rodriguez's best performance. Her no-nonsense attitude pushes through no matter how many times she's bitten.
Rain. What? We have to do something about your wounds. I'm fine. I said I'm fine.
Rain's fate culminates in one of the best scenes of the movie that perfectly embodies the theme and desperation of survival horror. At the climax of the film, we have 4 survivors left out of 10, 2 of which are infected, and 1 handgun. They're on the train hoping to beat the clock before the hive is permanently sealed. All the while, Alice has desperately tried to reassure all of them that no one else is going to die. Despite being injected with a potential cure, Rain hands Alice her stopwatch, knowing that she's going to die. Manson and Beltrami's score perfectly sinks in as Alice thinks that one more of her team has died.
I'm not dead yet.
By the end of the film, Rain becomes a zombie and is put out of her misery, leaving Alice and Matt as the only survivors, defeated and broken. And just as Alice attempts to save Matt from his infection, they're seized by faceless umbrella scientists and are once again thrust into a blinding white nightmare they thought they had escaped. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is blissfully unaware, adding to the theme of isolation and hopelessness. What ultimately completes this vision of hopeless horror is the score composed by Marco Beltrami and Marilyn Manson, whose sound evokes disease, technology, an amnesiac, mystery. These 3 elements stay throughout the rest of the score and are essential to establishing the atmosphere.
My inspiration for the main theme melody was based very much on just imagining sort of Alice in Wonderland inserted into this just terrible world of decay and biological warfare.
The melodious rhythms represent the innocence and bliss that is found within the futuristic setting of the hive and the amnesia-induced isolation of Alice.
I think you'll find it.
All traces of real-world normality are essentially erased. This becomes further illustrated by pianos and violins that undertake a disheartening and lost feeling. Meanwhile, the corruption and diseased aspect of the score comes from sickening synthesizers and guitars. Manson contributed to this cocktail of morbidly beautiful music by also experimenting with sound design, creating tones and sounds that invoke the ambiance of infection and seclusion. This can be heard in the main theme, using the echo of what almost sounds like a ticking clock or a train passing over rails.
When we first started working with Manson, it was almost like working with a sound designer rather than a composer, because the first thing he played me was like 10 noises, almost like a really fucked up ticking clock, and you know, just strange sounds, and I go, I like that, I like that, I don't like that, and then he would go off and work those textural details into an actual track.
The synthesizers go hand in hand with such sound design by creating music that complements the soulless and sterile research of the Hive. It's a score that exquisitely sets the tone and mood for Resident Evil's story and plays a pivotal role in the adaptation's success. As stated before, many fans were disappointed with the movie because it wasn't faithful to the source material's story and characters, but what they failed to see is that it still possessed all the elements that made the Resident Evil games what they were on a technical level, from fixed camera angles, homages to cutscenes, finding weapons, and even disappearing bodies.
Where are the bodies? Where did they go?
Additionally, the first Resident Evil game, as much as it's my favorite in the franchise, doesn't hold up as well as its sequels. Clunky gameplay, cheesy voice acting.
Jill, you're here too.
Yes, you're here too?
And endless backtracking are all staples of the original game, and I love it all the same. So how does a game with these elements hold up to an adaptation that I claim has so much depth? Because the movie took all the sci-fi horror ideas of the first game and brought it to the 21st century. In fact, it did exactly what the Resident Evil remake did. In 2002, a complete remastering of the original game was released and did a phenomenal job of bringing the sci-fi horror elements of the original to a brand new generation of console technology and graphics. The remake applied another level of depth and polish to the gameplay and story, and is regarded as one of the best in the series. It provided more insight into the concept of a glorious mansion becoming transformed into a biohazardous haunted house, all under the guise of deadly experiments by a maleficent pharmaceutical company. Almost like a movie that came out in March of 2002, 1 month before the remake. This played a big part in what I like to consider the glory days of Resident Evil, stemming from the remake in 2002 to Resident Evil 4 in 2005, a time where we were given 6 games and 2 movies that were able to show Resident Evil's world of survival horror in an updated and ambitious format with new graphics and expanded storylines. In closing, Anderson's first Resident Evil movie is not a direct adaptation of the first game, and those who expect it to be should approach it with a different perspective. It serves as a quasi-prequel to the first game, while also standing on its own as a psychological sci-fi horror amnesiac story, crossed with an Alice in Wonderland adaptation. One may even call it fanfiction. To me, it's a very entertaining and unique experiment. Instead of meeting Chris and Jill from Stars, we meet an anonymous heroine with amnesia whose name we never learn until the closing credits. Instead of reaching the underground lab at the end of the game, we spend the entire movie there. What we have at the end of the day is an experimental blend between a video game adaptation and a director's personal vision of tainted fantasy metaphor. A golden fairy tale beneath the dark roots of a postmodern horror movie. In part 2, we'll be exploring how Apocalypse and Extinction evolved the trilogy, but began to lose sight of those original elements, and how the second trilogy fell apart due to a change of tone, retconning the story, and going way too over the top.
If you'd really like to know, he went that way.
Who did?
The White Rabbit.
He did?
He did what?
Went that way.
Who did?
The White Rabbit.
What rabbit?
But didn't you just say? I mean, oh dear.